Everyone, welcome back to AMS Automotive Evolution with me, Christopher Ludwig. Glad you keep on joining with us here in what I'm calling our battery barrage of content and sessions here. You heard last couple of minutes ago on scaling up battery cell production. We spoke earlier in the day with Polestar, talking about their battery strategy, and we're going to be continuing that across a number of different providers and key players, both in this session and in what's to come later in the day. I keep saying it every time we speak, but the pace of change and transformation keeps accelerating, and I think there's no place where that is clearer than in the automotive electric vehicle battery, lithium-ion battery production value chain. In many ways, the technology is outpacing or hard to keep pace with in terms of production. Dennis Nobelius from Polestar talked about chemistries changing every 2 years. Clearly, that has an impact in how on the production side of things. But also, there is no single integrated player that can basically capture this entire chain on itself. No OEM, no battery cell maker, perhaps arguably no integrator either. We're talking very complex upstream supply chains in minerals and of course key suppliers, a whole software supply chain that moves alongside, obviously chemistries as we talked about, and complicated packs, modules, and housings, which have big implications across production as well. It takes a lot of partnerships. We're seeing a lot of shifts in business models, whether it is in joint ventures, whether it is OEMs venturing into new areas, partnering upstream, downstream, even implications across what charging infrastructure players and energy providers will mean for this, and not least considering how fast regulations are also pushing the industry to go, and this also requires quite careful coordination. So that's partly the context. That's what we want to talk about in this session on the partnerships in the battery value chain. And I'm very pleased to be able to welcome three experts talking across different aspects and expertise within the battery value chain. I'll introduce them one by one. One of our key experts is responsible across commercial vehicles, Scania's in-house battery assembly for electrified trucks, which he's done since 2019, leading on all planning, development, manufacturing for a battery assembly plant in Södertälje, which we'll talk more about, in Sweden, that will start operations next year. He's been with Scania since 2000, mainly across production management, process engineering, and logistics. And he is currently head of battery production. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tony Persson. Tony, it's great to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Tony joined us for some discussion a few months ago, talking about some of the Scania's battery production strategies, and we're so pleased you can join us as part of this panel. Another expert joining us leads a Brussels-based nonprofit called Recharge, which represents stakeholders across the battery supply chain and advocates for sustainable and competitive lithium battery value chain within Europe. He himself has had a career in battery technology, including working for Saft, where he had held various positions across lithium-ion technology. Ladies and gentlemen, pleased to welcome Claude Chanson, General Manager for Recharge.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for welcoming me.
Thank you very much, Claude. Great to have you here. And last but not least, we're pleased to welcome another expert who has more than 20 years of experience in the automotive industry, has worked on a number of technology innovations across consultancies and also at Jaguar Land Rover, and then the then Premier Auto Group at Ford. He's led on key joint venture discussions in China, has set up an automotive business operation in emerging markets, and has worked quite a bit of late in the EV battery ecosystem. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to also welcome Sajid Yacoob, who's a senior partner for smart mobility at Tata Consultancy Services.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christopher. Good to be here.
Great. Well, I'm very pleased to have all of you. Welcome all of you. So let's get down to it. As I mentioned, of course, the production timescales, as we keep emphasizing, are highly compressed in terms of ramping up battery productions and meeting some of the both e-mobility targets as well as the regulations which are being set. But I'd like to hear from you in terms of how much of a challenge that is putting on your manufacturing to keep pace with that. And I'd like to start first with you, Tony, since you're ramping up just in time for all this at Scania.
Yeah, we do have a current battery electric vehicle out on the market, but as you say in the intro here, things are moving quite fast, and we want to be ready to take on new challenges and so on. I think it all comes down to a few parallel parameters: how ready the customer is, how ready the infrastructure, charging infrastructure is, how ready the products are. And I also believe for the heavy and medium commercial vehicles, they will follow the trend that we've seen over the past years for passenger cars. So yeah, we are really trying to ramp up, and it's quite a challenge, but it's good fun, and we are in the starting blocks for next generation. So yeah, it's good times.
It is, and it's a good time for us to be connecting with you and for our audience to connect with you on this as it ramps up, Tony. Claude, representing as you do members across the value chain here in Europe, how much of a challenge are you seeing this current ramp up and pace? We also have many other headwinds, I think, which we're facing at the same time, which I'm sure we'll touch on, whether it's cost and materials. But where do you see the bottlenecks?
Yes, indeed, it's a real challenge because we start on the European side not as a leader, as you know, and we have intentions to become at least one of the leaders and very significant manufacturing stage in Europe. And indeed, this is a big challenge because not only it has to be successful from the point of view of, as you said, investment and size of manufacturing and so on, but as well we have this challenge to become a more sustainable battery value chain. This is really driven by the European political vision and this new batteries regulation that is under discussion, which has set already, very short timelines to implement, for example, the declaration of carbon footprint, which would be a good indicator, but which means indeed that the battery European value chain has to not only grow up and develop, but as well in parallel make sure that the developed products and methods are sustainable and can compete worldwide from this sustainability, like, for example, the carbon footprint or the battery passport. We may talk about this again later, which are certainly additive challenges and in quite a short timeline.
Okay, thank you, Claude, and indeed all very important points. Sajid, what are you seeing in the projects that you're working across?
So I think, as my fellow colleague said, it's an incredibly challenging world at the moment. But I think if you just step back a second, I think actually OEMs traditionally weren't very keen to actually get involved with battery cell production. And I think, one of the things that's really helped focus them quite recently, though, is the semiconductor shortage. And I think now that they're really realizing that they need to be in that particular value chain. But then also that leads to another particularly significant challenge is the limited technical experience in this area as well. And the obviously limited short supply of skilled labor. And then you have when you've got the plan in place, when you actually want to put the gigafactories in place, then you obviously got the raw material bottlenecks as well, coming from specific suppliers throughout the world, whether that's going to be lithium or nickel or cobalt as well. And then building upon what Claude said in terms of sustainability, you're also seeing more rules relating to localization as well. And that makes it even more challenging trying to ramp up your production, etc., as we go forward. So definitely quite a challenging environment at the moment.
Yes, and we'll be going into a bit more detail of some of those in terms of localization. But obviously, Tony, that's a key part of what Scania is doing in terms of setting up this assembly for battery packs, and I believe also power cables in Södertälje. You're working with a partner, with Northvolt, in terms of supply. Can you give us a sense of how the ramp up is going in the next stages as you move towards serial production, which I believe is next year? You mentioned that there's a pilot or small scale production, but clearly this is to move to a different level.
Yeah, true. I agree to much of what Sajid said there with the challenges, and what we have tried to, as a solution to those challenges, is to partner up with, in our case, Northvolt, for the industry part or chemistry part of the value chain there, whereas we see it as an important skill, if you like, to have production in-house in Södertälje, located where our head offices are, and where main R&D functions, purchase functions, marketing functions, and obviously production functions are located. And this gives us a possibility to build up a team, a value creation team, where we try to create battery as a value and see the full scope. And Northvolt there plays an important role in terms of that partnership, both on the design side, but also on the chemistry or process industry side, whereas we more focus then on design of the full battery and the full scale there, but as a production facility of the assembly of modules and packs, and then on the vehicles themselves, the electrical vehicles themselves. So don't know if I answered that question so clearly, but partnership is certainly important, and I think this is just the start of partnerships, and new forms, ecosystems, and new partnerships will form in the future. I'm sure of that.
Yes, and as you outlined clearly, the decision there to work with a partner on the chemistry side, but the assembly and production of the pack considered to be quite important enough to bring in house. It might seem obvious, but what drove that main decision? I mean, was it localizing to be close to production to save costs? Was it having more control over the overall system, for example?
Yeah, more control than cost, I would say. But most important, to gain or to create the base where we can gain knowledge of this new technology. As Sajid also was referring to, it is for automotive industry, well, perhaps not new to this date, but newish technology, and bringing everything together here at our headquarters means that we create fast-paced cross-functional teams where R&D together with production, together with purchase and other functions collaborate. This new environment, this new technology requires fast-paced development, and all those parts of that chain need to be connected in order to gain pace, in order to gain knowledge. So that's the main drivers for doing that here.
Claude, I want to start the next question with you. I think it's a bit of a debate sometimes in the industry, the extent to which the battery will become commoditized versus be or remain a competitive advantage. When you look at the landscape in the value chain for cells and systems, do you see it as more likely to be a competitive advantage, or is there a degree of commodification that is bound to set in?
Good question indeed, because based on my experience on the world of batteries several years ago, and what are the big markets? Because a lot of people in the, let's say, the public in general, think about batteries, like your primary cells, you put your non-rechargeable battery, you put in your remote control, and that's clearly a commodity that you purchase, based on price and I don't know, color or performance maybe, but that's something you can find everywhere. Also, these automotive batteries like starter, lighting, and ignition, these 12-volt lead-acid batteries that you can purchase in any place. So the idea that batteries could be a commodity is strongly implemented, in the general society. And today, we really feel that this will not be the case for the automotive industry, because today this battery is really at the heart of the technological and technology competition and vehicle performance. And I believe this is also one of the driver of these new partnerships, which we are discussing today, which means that if you are an OEM, and of course, as you know, OEMs have very competitive world to live with, where they have to have a range of products corresponding to various technical levels and public expectations. And they compete on all the aspects. I mean, of course, the aesthetics and the design, but as well the technical performance and the cost, and all of these aspects are more or less competitive points for the automotive industry. And in this framework, it's not possible to forget about the very strong direct impact of the battery design, the battery performance on these vehicles, criteria and competitiveness of the vehicle. So what we understand today is really this way to commodity or battery standardization may come, but certainly not at the time where competition is just establishing and looking for differentiating factors. Maybe in 2050, we will come back and say, well, there are baseline electric vehicles that are all using same type of batteries. But I would say that's very premature today. When we look at the real landscape of industry organization, we see more and more of partnership, as Tony was mentioning, between at least the cell manufacturer and an OEM, let's say, quite strong relations to make sure that the cells, which are at the heart of the technology, are really specifically designed for some competitive view of the OEM.
Well, that'll be a good point to pick up in 2050 when we hold AMS Automotive Evolution on the colony of Mars, and I invite you all to join and debate it then. But I think it's a really interesting perspective, and the landscape here is changing. If any of you who watched our session earlier with Polestar, they talked about I think I counted at least 5 different partnerships across battery cell, whether it was different suppliers for different vehicles, performance-wise, on top of a joint venture, of course, that Volvo is doing. It just sort of shows you that the way OEMs are approaching it, of course, is in a variety of different ways, diverse strategies. Sajid, I was interested to kind of get your take on that and how you see those business models and partnership models kind of evolving in the current landscape, because I think that also plays a key factor in the competitive considerations of the battery.
So I think, thank you as well. Just to lead into that with what Claude was also discussing, I think he's absolutely right that one of the key differentiators now going forward for electric vehicles has to be the battery. Whether it's going to be range, you see Mercedes with the EQX has over 1,000 kilometers of range, whether it's performance, whether it's how long it takes to charge, whether it's safety. Even most recently, Toyota announced that after 10 years with their new EV batteries, you still, I think, retain over 90% capacity. So, it's clear that OEMs are using the battery as a differentiation and a USP to come forward to their particular customers. But actually, in terms of that partner ecosystem, building up on what Tony said, there's a number of different ways you can take it. I think it's recognized and acknowledged, and you said it from the start, no one company has the end-to-end expertise here to act alone. And historically, I think we'd go into a normal, OEM supplier relationship, and they would source whatever batteries and go through the normal procurement process as part of that. But that has changed quite significantly. Obviously with the global political and geopolitical issues that we're having, there's more focus now on securing your supply from friendly countries, but also with the challenges that we've had with COVID and the semiconductors, there's more of a push towards localization as well. So what we're seeing in the industry really is really 3 or 4 different types of a view from a partnership. There's a big push to joint ventures. And whether it's for example, we talked about Northvolt as well, but whether it's Ford, whether it's General Motors, all are pushing, and Toyota, they're all pushing towards joint ventures. But in the joint venture, it's really focusing on the battery cell design and the battery chemistry, whereas most of them are doing the actual module manufacturing in-house. And that's, I think quite the big distinction that we're seeing with major OEMs as well. And what they're then trying to do is they're looking at, once they've established the JV, really focusing future IP and development within the JV to benefit their OEM in 3, 5, 7 years in the future. And that's something we're seeing baked into these JV contracts as well. Ever so less often, we're seeing and we're starting to see JVs spun off into separate organizations that are specific on battery design and development. And one of the key reasons for this, apart from the recent blip in the stock market, is obviously the valuation of these companies as well. You know, it's a good way to raise funds. It's a good way, for example, when you go to the equity markets as well. And then I think extremely less, but we're seeing it with the smaller companies, is your normal contract scenarios, as I've said as well. But again, in my experience, that's becoming less and less often.
Thank you, Sajid. That's a great overview of what's happening there. Tony, okay, we know Scania has the partnership with Northvolt in this context for this assembly. If we look at the wider Volkswagen group, we see other strategies as well, not least their own gigafactory strategies over the next coming years, range of other partnerships. For Scania, as an example, are you also looking at other kinds of relationships and partnerships as the technology and the production ramps up?
Well, speaking of cells, then cell production and so on. Currently, we are focusing on Northvolt, and we have a great relationship, if you like, with them. As you say, the Volkswagen Group is setting up a center of excellence, a center for knowledge to build up that, also to manufacture the cells in themselves there. And there are many other players out on the market, and I'm sure if we look down the road a few years, I'm sure we will see some type of change there in partnerships, just to broaden that. I mean, it is the situation we have at hand now in the world. I think it's safer. You want to partner up with different partners to hedge your bets, if you like. And we are also scanning that and trying to do that. If you look at the supply chain, we are quite localized where we are now, with many producers in Sweden, Northern Europe. And I think that's a natural step after recent events, also relating to what earlier was mentioned with the semiconductor crisis and so on. So trying to bring that home a little bit to Europe. Yeah.
So that there will obviously there is then some perhaps requirement for diversification given those challenges, at least at a broader industry level. Claude, when you look across your memberships, do you
Yes.
see a particular pattern and trend emerging?
Yeah, indeed. What we see is, well, I mean, as you know, we have in Europe this vision of and this political push, in fact, to really accelerate and develop this European battery value chain. But the industry has to take pragmatic approach on this. And what we see is, first of all, the OEMs are turning to the next upstream step, which is the cell manufacturer. And either they try to integrate themselves, as was mentioned, or of course do a partnership with cell manufacturer. But as you mentioned, this value chain of the batteries is much longer than that. Then you need a cathode manufacturer, and then you need material suppliers, and so on and so forth. So clearly there is this promotion to develop a European ecosystem and then integrate and create partnership with local partners. But we once again, I have to say, we start from a rather weak situation in Europe, which means that in fact not everything can be established at the same time. And what we see as a scheme is, first of all, you ask to new gigafactory to become your supplier. So you do a partnership and so on. But this gigafactory, they will have to source qualified material with qualified equipment and so on. Not everything can be reinvented at once. And then maybe in the second step, what we see is that once they have a qualified product, this new gigafactory will qualify their local supplier for their raw materials and things like this. So I see it more as a step by step because of the challenge, of course, to qualify new products and be competitive at the same time makes it that we see indeed the industry and this ecosystem is just progressively developing, I would say, from downstream and progressively upstream, but not everything together. Of course, there is the will and the wish to develop all together, but we see some careful and let's say sometimes progressive approach. Yes.
Okay, absolutely. So ever changing landscape. I'm coming back to, if you like, the planning side of this. So again, Tony, if I turn to you and look at how you partner in this instance with Northvolt on the cell production, one thing we know, and I think we'll talk about in other sessions too, is how fast the technology is changing, whether it's the cell design itself, different options between pouch, prismatic, cylindrical, etc. Just as one example, there's many examples of how things are changing. How you talked earlier about having quite joined up teams. How closely do you have to kind of align as well with the cell supplier on the technology and R&D to ensure that the assembly that you're setting up can keep pace or can adapt very, very quickly to those changes?
Yeah, again, many parameters there at the same time, but on R&D, to mutually design, the cell chemistry has a big impact on the product that we want to create and the product that we want to put on the market. Then from a manufacturing perspective, we are trying to close in on Northvolt so that we have a common base, a common quality system. The cells are measured throughout the manufacturing chain, and we take that data to our factory, to our processes, and we also measure the cells, the modules, and the packs throughout there. I think traceability will be key in the future, and that data that we're getting from Northvolt and together trying to comprehend, if you like, that will form the base for a database where we can trace back what has happened during the manufacturing process, and that's a big platform for collaboration there, and we are collaborating with Northvolt, trying to achieve that.
I think it's particularly interesting that aspect of data management and transfer and across the production process to ensure the quality, not just of the build, but I think of the overall pack. Will that require, or does that require some specific systems, data standards, and protocols, for example? And I know this, is that another challenge in the context of IT systems communicating to each other and integrating that into your backbone, IT backbone?
It is certainly. It's a very good question. I think digitalization and Industry 4.0 has been on everyone's lips for a while now, but in my opinion, it hasn't really taken off on a bigger scale. I was on a very interesting benchmark at SKF, the Swedish bearing manufacturer, in Gothenburg a few years back, and they had a great platform for digitalization or Industry 4.0. But what I do think is, or do believe, is that the battery technology, that's changeover in manufacturing technology from maybe manual assembly to highly automated assembly, new assembly processes, new welding processes, and so on, creates a base for digitalization for Industry 4.0. That combined with the need for example, traceability, as I spoke about, but also, as we spoke about earlier, the fast pace design of new products maybe requires that you can skill your workers, that you can train your workers on a digital platform, virtual training, or to commission new products or new processes in a digital built-up factory. So I think the battery is the leverage that Industry 4.0 digitalization needs to really take off. So I would say that we will see a big change there in the coming years.
Okay, so again, this is an accelerating factor to it. Sajid, yeah, I wanted to turn to you on that to see what you. I thought you might have something to come in on.
No, thank you, Christopher. I think I got to say, and I'm sure my colleagues would agree. I just feel like it's the most exciting time to be in the automotive industry. And honestly, from a case perspective, the connected, autonomous, shared, and electric, it's led to significant technological innovation across the value chain. And I think if you now take that from an EV perspective, well, actually, digitization now is happening in all parts of that particular value stream, some more mature than others. But for example, we're getting into the process of simulation models. So the idea of having the digital twin for the battery R&D, looking at the different electrochemistry, looking at the permutations to build a digital model before you actually then go and manufacture that particular battery as well. And we're seeing much more sophisticated AI and machine learning algorithms that really help us try to improve battery performance. And they're becoming very, very sophisticated as we go, and I think Tony said it as well, we're starting to see the advent of much more smart manufacturing, but also connected manufacturing across the facilities with the connected supply chain as well. Hopefully bringing better visibility and lowering your total cost to serve as well. And then what you'll also see going forward is you'll see an online digital marketplace that starts for battery second life and recycling as well. And couple that with all of the requirements for sustainability, these can only be achieved through digital solutions, whether they're going to be, solutions like blockchain, etc. That's the only way of ensuring authentic status on all these batteries and tracking them, from the ground all the way up to the recycling elements as well.
Fantastic, absolutely. So again, I think would love to spend a lot more time on that topic, but I want to hit it on a few other points with the panel here, and we've sort of alluded to this in a few places, but just to get a little bit more detail on how you work and onboard some of the suppliers in this value chain who may be coming from, let's say, sectors not necessarily new themselves, but new certainly to automotive in some cases, but they're coming from the mining, chemistry side, software and development, etc. Is there a new process that, starting with you on this one, Tony, and then I'm keen to hear from Claude, that you kind of using to establish validation, to kind of meet the standards that are typical and needed for automotive industry, whether in terms of testing, etc. And yet, obviously, with those timescales in mind that we were talking about, which are indeed rather compressed. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I'm afraid on this one I'm going to give a bit short and maybe boring answer. We haven't seen that much of a struggle in that field yet. Maybe it will pop up around the corner, but so far the integration with suppliers, suppliers is going fairly well. So no, my answer is no.
And I built it up with such drama that it was going to be such an issue. But Claude, maybe you have a different perspective here.
Well,
Maybe it's not so specific for Tony, but in the wider sense of this validation issue.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy, Tony, that in Scania you tackle the situation. But I see in the recharge membership, as you know, we are with the global value chain, and I see indeed concerns which are raised on whether this will be in fact so easily or swiftly implemented, this digitalization and strong integration about the value chain. I would like to underline here that as was mentioned by Sajid, these are very interesting times because at the moment we have a regulation, the new batteries regulation in Europe that is discussed, where we have this political view and ambitions to have a very high level of transparency, of traceability, of information to the final users and consumers, and the carbon footprint is one example, but we also have the global requirements about due diligence in the value chain, so a complete transparency, and some other examples like, for example, the declaration of the minimum performances. So a number of indicator that will be in fact not an option but a legal requirement, and we try of course to make this going hand in hand with the development of in fact the digitalization, the digital twin that was mentioned before, this blockchain that you were mentioning, which in fact in practice for the moment are really apparently the right technical solution to demonstrate that you have a transparent and let's say sustainable behavior along the value chain without transferring confidential information. I mean, when you are in the position of supplying your customer, some aspects of your supply chain cannot be publicly disclosed because they are directly related to your cost or to your competitiveness aspects and so on. And so there is still I would say, hopefully, yes, we have solutions, but still some concern that the value chain will be capable of establishing such strong transparency, such high level of digitalization, and all of these, in fact, result in a huge number of data to be handled and shared, and let's say being made available. Including to the European Commission, which is intended to open a website that's new, where you will find a lot of information on the batteries placed on the market in Europe. So I would say indeed that as an association, we would like to be optimistic, but also we share the concern of some of our members that, well, the devil sometimes is in the details, as you know, and when we will come to the real practical implementations, we may face some struggle, and hopefully this will not go against the competitiveness of our industry, because here again these add to the ambition to have a completely transparent value chain and a number of communications and information about sustainability, which is certainly possible but just still to be achieved.
Yeah, and obviously this transparency is important for a number of reasons, and you alluded to as well with the European Commission. I think this connects back to the battery passport idea you spoke of earlier, that the requirements for localization and sustainable validated suppliers that will come into force. This is obviously a complex picture in the overall chain, but some interesting technology to come in to support that. Sajid, perhaps you can also broaden our view out here a bit more. I know you're actually based in North America, not just working here across Europe. How are you kind of comparing the development of this ecosystem that we're talking about here within North America, and then of course both of them in the shadow of China, to say the least? But how do you put this in a global context?
It's a bit of a difficult question to answer very succinctly, but I will try my best. Yeah. I think in terms of the US and EU, again, they're playing catch up in my opinion in this particular field. Yeah, I think they've recognized, that they need to actually quickly catch up with China, as you mentioned, and we're seeing a lot of specific policies in both of the regions in terms of subsidies, regulation, etc., to try to localize, ramp up production, and also encourage other, all companies across the value chain to come into Europe as well. The US is virtually, I think, following similar policy endeavors as per the EU. So President Biden and the Department of Energy recently announced, I think it's a $3 billion plan to strengthen the US supply chain for electric vehicle batteries as well. They've gone sort of one step further as well. And there's something from memory called the Defense Production Act. And that actually is something that the president's going to invoke to ensure that he can encourage domestic production of all of the key components and materials for the electric vehicle battery as well. Meaning it will be much easier to invest. You'll cut out the red tape. You'll get subsidies on land acquisition. You'll get better funding and raising capital, because the one advantage the US has, it's much easier to raise capital here. And if you look at the valuations of companies in this sector versus, say, the European indexes, they're worth much more here. So companies generally want to come to the US. And then also the other thing is, the big difference, I think, from a US perspective is they want to focus as a USP on battery recycling. The feeling is that China hasn't really become the experts in the battery recycling field. So there's a good chance for both the US and the EU to really catch up with that. Then if you move on to China, I think just a few very quick points on China, they recognized very early on that you needed the complete ecosystem if you're going to be successful in this particular field. And by creating that, they also had actual better access to the skill set and the technology. It may sound odd, but because they're so big in manufacturing consumer electronics, and I know that's small scale smartphones, etc., but those skills are also somewhat transferable into these larger industries as well, especially as they were making their own batteries for smartphones, etc., etc. The other thing in China that was quite big was government support. I won't go into the political factor, but the government over there can make very quick decisions, and very rarely will it be challenged from a legal or a political mindset, which we do get in the Europe and the US as well. And also they have access to the minerals in that particular economy as well. So how quickly could the EU and US catch up? The last point on this is, firstly, they just need significant skills and training of the right people and the right talent. They need to upskill in terms of the value chain, but also access to raw materials as well. And they need to make investment across the board much more easier and reduce red tape. And lastly, just focus on the USP, which might be, as we've said, things like battery recycling as well.
So and then it's sorted. So just that. No, thank you, Sajid. Great points. We had an audience question that kind of comes partly off the back, I think, of what you've said there, Sajid. The question is sort of how, I'll paraphrase it, is how important is battery end of life and battery second life going to be, or for vehicle manufacturing, and perhaps for the overall battery manufacturing. I'm going to turn to you first there, Tony, just to sort of get a sense of, clearly you're at the SOP, not even an SOP yet, but to what extent is the end of battery life and recycling already feeding into the production design and plans that you have?
Yeah, it has, and it will have in the future even more a huge impact on what we're doing, what we're thinking, and what we want to do and achieve. But we just very, very, very quick. The battery that we have right now out on the market, we will put that in ESSs and use that as a platform. And we are teaming up there, speaking of partnerships with Vestas, for example, to build those kind of stations. And we see that as second life or end of life, if you wish to, for the batteries, and also teaming up with recycling firms and also with Northvolt, speaking of recycling of the chemicals and the metals there. So it's important.
So we're coming close to the end, and as predicted, there's more to ask than there is answered, but we knew that would be the case. Perhaps some concluding thoughts from you each. We've talked a bit about talked a lot about in the last 45 minutes on ecosystems and new partnerships that develop on this. I just want to get a sense from all of you on how you think that needs to develop further, whether in a more open, transparent, even open source kind of approach to aspects of this, or also obviously partnering more widely. So again, I'm going to start with Claude on that, and then we'll move through the rest of our panelists to conclude.
Yeah, thanks. So this is just more about the vision of what we see. And what we see is that the world is transforming with digitalization and a lot of data exchange. And I would say battery industry, like other industries, now facing this new virtual world, world of digital twins and so on, which become more and more important. And in this world, I would say all of these vision of the past industry, so-called partnership, joint ventures, and so on, I think all of these will be modified and impacted by this so strong virtual exchange and transparency requirements, as you mentioned, which in fact it's maybe a closer partnership from some point of view. You will have to handle so much data and knowledge about your supplier and your complete supply chain that this create links, of course. But on the other hand, also so broad because the value chain is so long and large for batteries industry, particularly if you want to have multiple suppliers, then which means that you cannot be in fact so much integrated, or this past word that we word about vertical integration may not really exist anymore. We will have to reinvent new words for this new type of partnerships.
Okay, so we need a new vocabulary to move ahead. Tony, how do you? Where's the next step for you in this ecosystem?
Well, first of all, I agree, but how to formulate that short. But JVs and partnerships will exist also in the future, I believe. But ecosystems and shared knowledge and open source, I think, will come even stronger in the future. I'm pretty sure of that. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. Or otherwise, a 10-minute discussion longer.
No, but I think it's a strong point to end on. So, and Sajid, last thoughts for you on that.
All right, just in a very quick 30 seconds. Firstly, I think technology is incredibly important. We didn't talk about it much, but solid-state batteries or the further evolution of the technology, because there's still challenges here, whether there's range, whether there's cost, whether there's safety. There's significant challenges that actually we need to overcome to get the wider user base on board. And then the second bit is just talking a little bit about open source. Just there's a balance there, because the battery, as we said, is a competitive advantage. Yes. So from an open source perspective, I think we'll see it more in battery second life and reuse, but also more significantly for safety factors. And I think we're going to see a lot more sharing of that data in real time than it feeds back into the design and engineering process as well.
Okay, thank you so much. I think a tremendous insight from all of you. It's been really a pleasure to host this conversation and to build on the discussion, which will continue to carry forward on all of those points. I want to thank each of my panelists for the time: Sajid, Yacoob, Claude, Chanson, and Tony Persson. A lot more to come, but really a pleasure for me to have you on our panel today.
Thank you.
And on Sajid points, I should say, talking about future designs and technology, solid state, different pouch cell designs. That's actually a topic coming up in just 12 minutes with our next panel, looking more at the future of battery production. So stay where you are. We're coming right back at you. And just to let you know again, we are bringing a live version of this event to you later this year, end of October 27 in Munich, at the headquarters of the Süddeutsche Zeitung, which also happens to be our mother company as well at AMS. So we're very excited that we'll be able to continue these discussions and dialogues in person in a hybrid event. Hopefully some of our panelists will be joining to continue that discussion there at the time. Don't forget to get in touch. You can get in touch with our team if you're interested in finding out a bit more as we build towards that event. So just wanted to keep that on your radar. In the meantime, take a break. We'll be back here in about 10 minutes talking about future of battery production and technology. Stay tuned.